אנחנו נתחיל. שלום לכולם, ברוכים השבים. אני מקווה שעד עכשיו נהניתם ותודה שאתם ממשיכים איתנו. אני פותחת את המושב לאחר הפסקת הצהריים ואני אזמין את הגברת ליסה סימן שהיא חברה בוועדות של איגוד האינטרנט הבינלאומי, בוועדות התקינה, והייתה שותפה גם בכתיבת התקן וקג 2.0, וליסה תדבר על התאמות נגישות לאנשים עם מוגבלות קוגניטיבית, לקות למידה והפרעות קשב וריכוז. ההרצאה תהיה באנגלית ברשותכם, וליסה, please.
Thank you, Ilana. The other thing is that I'm chair of the task force inside WorkEgg and PF that's looking at cognitive and learning disabilities, but I'm speaking today as an individual, so nothing that I say is official or for representative of the W3C or anything like that. So that being said, we've got a relatively new task force happening in WorkEgg, and we're doing at the moment a gap analysis, looking at what can be done for what is being done, what should be done for people with cognitive and learning disabilities. So at the moment we're focusing on a gap analysis where we're looking at the situation and like a literary review or something of user groups. We're looking at 8 different user groups, from dementia to dyslexia, dyscalculia, autism, asphasia, people who can't use language, the different technologies that are available. And we're doing the background research, and then we're going to produce a roadmap and techniques. So that's where we are. We're at early stages. And we're going to probably end up with a combination where there's some techniques that are good for all these different user groups, some are specifically good for specific user groups, then you might have ways from an architectural level of jumping between different resources. But what I want to talk today about is actually just techniques that so far we know about that seem to be good for across the board people with different learning and cognitive disabilities. So that's really what I'm talking about today. Things you can do already, not all required, but you may want more people to be able to understand your content and use your content. When we're talking about cognitive disabilities, some of the main groups that we're talking about are people with memory problems now. If you reading problems, problems with executive functioning and problem solving, attention, and computation. A very interesting point is that cognitive disabilities tend to be localized. So I personally am dyslexic. I don't have a visual memory, for instance. I don't have any problem with problem solving. So people often think that their content's much too complicated for people with learning disabilities. It's probably not true. You've probably got some of the biggest experts in the world in your topic who have learning disabilities, or maybe they're developing cognitive disabilities as they age. And so one area you often just, well, like with physical disabilities, sometimes people compensate. So they may have weak points in some areas and strong points other areas, and you want people to be able to understand as much as you can. The audience we're talking about is huge. It's the biggest group of people with disabilities, and it affects everything they do. And as we rely more on online content and information technology interfaces, we make people more disabled than they need to be. For example, my father has Alzheimer's, and he bought a television set, and it came with 3 remote controls. So he can't use it. And so I put a little sticker by the on-off button, and that's all he can do, on and off, because to change the channel is a complicated. First you have to say which the source is from, and then you change the channel, and it was very complicated. It didn't need to be. If you'd have kept the old design metaphor that he was used to, he could have carried on being able to change the channel himself. The same is true for his air conditioning unit. It's got an ICT interface, and now he can't use it. So phone systems, and because all of you in your offices probably have one of these menu phone systems, I'm just going to go off topic and make a plea. A lot of people can't use them, and that means that I once tried to call the police, and they had a new menu system where you have to press something for something. My short-term memory, my auditory short-term memory is very, very weak. I can't use these systems, which means I can't call the police. That shouldn't be. Now, the solution is that I have to have an assistive caregiver. Well, I don't really need one, unless we make interfaces to exclude me from all more functions, in which case, just like my father can't turn the heating on and off, one can do that to anybody. My dog has an excellent sense of smell. The assumption was we all had that sense of smell. None of us would be able to get around. We would all be considered disabled because our sense of smell is wrong, too low. And the designs would be based on assuming a good sense of smell. So the more we can understand how you can get content to different groups with neurodiversity, the better we're going to be at including people. And in Israel, a huge one, of course, is immigrants. We welcome people from all different countries, so they have to be able to live here. And that often means using your content, and it means sending their kids to school and getting the information they need and reading whatever publications you're making. But also your personal aim. If you're making a document, there's a reason you're making this document for your users. You want them to either learn something or buy something. That you've got an aim for them. And if you're distracting them or making it too difficult, that they have to learn how to use your interface or something, then it's going to be harder for them to do what you want them to do, which is learn or understand your material. Another issue on web content is people need to feel safe. If you want people to buy something, they need to feel in control. They need to feel they understand what's going on. So if you don't have that confidence that you're safe, then you're less likely to go through with any transaction. And a lot of you want people to go through the transaction, signing up for whatever it is, that the reason that you've made this content in the first place. Now, safety is perceived. And the less people are able to do, and the more confused they feel in the environment that you've created, the less safe they'll feel, whether they're safe or they're not safe. You've made them less likely to engage. So some of the techniques that work across the board for disabilities, one is using structure, and people who are familiar with general accessibility know, put structure into your tags. Here I'm going to say the flip side of this. Make your structure visually obvious so people can find the content that they need. So if someone has a reading disability, they don't have to read through tons and tons of text to find the section that they need. They can just skim through the headings. You can use consistent styles. You can use colors and styles to show relationships and lists. And that's something that across the board seems to help people. As I said, it's early days of proving this with user experience testing, but this seems to be the consensus so far. So here I've got an example where I've got, big chapters in a different color, and High contrast, obviously, because we want people with low vision also to find it accessible. But we're using the structure. Now, I've got two different types of sub-content in boxes. One would be key points, and the other would be tools. So I've got a subsection on accessibility in CSS. So I can have a symbol of key points with a key next to it, or the use of symbols to help illustrate the structure. And then as you're flipping through, if you imagine this as a book, you can flip through, just go through all those key points the day before test. It's useful, actually, for most people, but there's a big overlap with just good usable practices. Now, I understand this session, a lot of people are into publications. I'd like to alert people to EPUB 3. It's a lot of organizations like IBM are embracing it. The core sections use HTML5 and DAISY, and it enables you to use all the standard WCAG techniques as well, which makes it easier also for translation, and you can then use CSS to have classes and types of content and make a really good structure that's also visually helpful. A word of warning, if you do use CSS for this, that all content, all important semantic content has to be available. So when people draw a symbol, and it says key points, that's fine. But you don't want the word key points and the symbol all to be in CSS, and then people who are using screen readers won't necessarily have alternative text to read. Okay, so that was one example. Another thing is using charts. We talk a lot about accessibility, about the need for text, but other people are going to need the charts and the pictures. Flow charts are fantastic for explaining procedures. You've got pictograms and symbols, and these all help people. And again, it comes back to learning disabilities and cognitive disabilities being localized. So someone might have a problem reading text, but they don't have a problem with the concepts you're trying to get over. On the other hand, it can be the other way around. People can have trouble with the content on a conceptual level, but not have trouble with the text. So you want to have different modes, different modalities for different types of people. Here's an interesting a piece of research. If you highlight the piece of a formula or chart that you're discussing, comprehension goes up 10%. And they did this with math students. And exactly the same material, exactly the same teaching. One group had highlighted what was the bit that's being discussed, the other didn't, and there's a 10% difference. Now, if you can imagine as a teacher the amount of effort you're putting in to get 10% more children understanding what you're talking about, I think that's useful. So it's that visual helping people zoom in to the relevant topics. Speaking of symbols, there's a different side of it, although, and it's different types of cognitive disabilities need different things when it comes to symbols. For instance, someone with dyslexia, you'd think that symbol's great. Someone with asphasia needs a symbol because they have a severe language disability. Someone with Alzheimer's, a symbol is really often unhelpful. You don't want people to have to learn something new. You want them to concentrate on what you're saying and not on learning your interface and your ideas of what symbols represent other things. So stick to the standard symbol, but even the standard symbols, I've got a slide, I've got a button that says save, I've got a symbol of a floppy disk. Now, floppy disks are from a few years ago. People need to learn that represents save. For a lot of us, we know that, but other people don't. If you've got someone elderly maybe, or they're a first-time user, they don't know what that means. So if you want them to remember that, you're putting a cognitive load on the user. And we want to avoid doing that. So if you wanted, I would say that to use the symbol, which I would recommend, people with this phrase who won't necessarily understand the word, you want to have both the symbol and the word. And that will help all the different groups available. Writing style. Writing style, use short, concise, or simple sentences. Give instructions clearly. Use active voicing rather than, you know how specifications are written, they're written, and I've written specifications, so I know this is how you have to write them, so that they can be legally interpreted and stuff like that. In a passive voicing, they're not going to say do this, they're going to say this is how it should be done. But it makes it harder for a lot of people to understand. So although sometimes you have to, where you can, avoid that. Avoid the double negatives, saying don't not do this, because people are going to get confused. The tooltips on any symbols or jargon that you've used. Short-term memory, lots of people, short-term memory is not good. Actually, also, as people get older, their short-term memory often decreases. So don't expect people to remember the terms you've used a few minutes ago or above the scroll bar and reiterate them. Now, that maps to WCAG, as you'll see typically in AAA. By law, we're required in Israel to do AA. Most of this is AAA. And the reason is we don't want people who are legislatively obliged to follow accessibility to also tell them what words to use. If you want to reach more users, go for the AAA. But you want to have a difference about what's a requirement and what's just good practice for including more people and being more accessible. So we'll make your site more accessible so that you can get your content to the maximum number of people. An interesting one is at the bottom, 3.1.6, that was with Israel in mind, and that's pronunciation. The dikduk and well, not really the dikduk, but the vowel sounds in Hebrew. If you put some in to help people read the words who don't have the visual memory of recognizing the whole word and figuring out the content, that's really useful, but also for people with a bad visual memory. Some font and layout things. Clear font, reasonably sized point, like 12 point, straight jagged edge on one side, so in English it would be left, in Hebrew it would be right. And you don't always have to go all the way across the page for content that you actually want people to read. So it's okay for a web address, but there we go. Something on web design. If you... Sure.
So we come from a software company that we also provide, the products for enterprise customers, and we often think about, do we want to sort of, we say dumb down the text. We don't want to appear more sophisticated. The product is sophisticated. On the other hand, it's being used by many people with disabilities as well. So what do you think about the conflict between our users who need this for their disabilities and the high-end users who expect something from our product? What do you think about that?
I'd say separate them. You might have, your getting started chapters, and then you have advanced features. And in the advanced features, you talk about all the advanced thing, and then you can have a chapter on the research behind these features, and then you can really impress anyone who needs to be impressed. And you keep it simple in the beginning. I think people are actually quite used to complicated technology having a simple interface and a simple getting started. And I'd say actually when it comes to web design, that's true as well. If you have an overload of features, you know, some web apps, you can have 30 buttons or 50 buttons. People don't know where to start. They're all cramped and crowded. And it looks scary. And that in itself makes it harder to use. What you can do is have more features. And take the 5 features you know people use, have those, and then have a more features thing, which toggles. And then you can load more features as people want them. And it kind of trains people in to the experience of the software. And that's the way of getting that, passing over control to the user as well, of what kind of interface they want. Where it comes to, are people interested in web design, or is it just all document focused? A bit of both?
Yes.
Okay. So nowadays there's a design metaphor that's quite popular called flat design, and a lot of people find it really hard to use because they don't put in boundaries or very light grey lines between different regions, and areas, different clickable areas are clickable or draggable, but they're not outlined. There's a word, and that's actually a clickable control, but it looks like text or something like that, and it looks very clean and modern. It's harder to use. I'm going to throw in a statistic here. From age 25, usability of web interfaces goes down 0.8% a year, which means by the time people are hitting 50, a lot of these interfaces are a lot less usable. And people who are in the more mature market, the majority of them are online. It's just hit the over 50% mark. I think it's 52% currently in the US. They're the biggest growing market. They control a huge amount of the money, the disposable income. And they're doubly as likely to give up in the middle of a transaction as someone who's under 65. Because they'll blame themselves, they'll lose confidence, and they won't know exactly what to do next. So you're losing huge market with trying to be more trendy, but if people aren't clicking through and completing a transaction, then that's a huge cost. So a button is an old-fashioned metaphor of the old, people know what a button is. You press the button to use the lift or elevator or to ring the doorbell of your house. So it's a current and old metaphor, design metaphor that people know what to do with. When you have text and you've made some hint, it's a slightly different shade or it's got a slight background, that makes it a clickable region. You're expecting people to figure that out, and you're going to lose people with every step that you're expecting them to figure out what you've inferred. Make the regions of the page clear. So what's the clickable region here or clickable region there? Draw a line around it so that what happens is what you're expecting to happen. Don't let things drag without you've picked something up, a widget up, and you didn't expect to. Make important functions like the save or the send above the scroll bar. People don't always think to scroll down. So they'll press next, which might be above the scroll bar, and they haven't saved their work, or something nasty like that. Something that is well covered at this time in WCAG is give people enough time. The one that I really like is Checkpoint 2.2.5, Success Criteria 2.2.5, which is, again, it's AAA. But across the board, every single learning and cognitive disability is going to have trouble with timing out and losing their session data. If you lose your information when the session chimes out, you're not going to come back if there's another way to do it. I have started using my old travel agent again because I find the hotel, I type in my passport number, but I have to go back and check my dates or I'll turn up on the wrong day. So I have to double check that. And I have to do that after I've had something to eat. And if all my information is gone, I'm not starting it again. And it doesn't matter what the disability is. People with cognitive and learning disabilities need to go away and check their work, or maybe they need someone to come and double check it for them. But generally, timing is always a problem. I assume that you're going to lose a customer. They're not going to come back. They'd rather pay the extra $100 commission and not have the stress. Distracting. Try not to distract your users. Don't interrupt your users with things going on in a page. And again, there are WCAG references to that too. And I've seen this on a lot of Israeli sites. Don't trick, deceive, or confuse your users. And it might sound pathetic that I have to suggest it, but you know when you buy an item and then you go to the checkout and they put 2? You know? Well, if you can imagine someone who has a cognitive disability, maybe early stages of dementia, and they've bought 2, and they meant to buy 1. They're going to give up on buying online. It's mean, it's immoral, and you might get an extra purchaser, but they're never going to come back. Error prevention, check if people are making errors and try and help them avoid that. Something else that we might end up with, and that's metadata in the headers of documents, being able to say what functionality this version is good for. So you could make, as per your question, 2 versions and have metadata tags so people know which one to switch to, and then you can have some kind of handshaking between a user who prefers a simplified version and your alternative content. And that's what we're working on. Okay, thank you.